Do you have a favorite?
Not meant to. But mostly the unloved ones, the unvisited ones, the cases that get dusty and ignored. All the broken and shunned creatures. Someone's got to care for them. Who shall it be if not us?
Yes.
Welcome to Rune Soup, a weekly podcast about magic, culture, and the very best new and old ideas for living in this world. Coming to you from 43 degrees south on a small farm in deepest Tasmania. My name is Gordon, and I shall be your host. This week, we welcome to the show anthropologist and Maya shaman-priestess, Gabriela Jurosz-Landa. Gabriela is the founder of the Forum of World Cultures and joins us today to talk about the Mayan calendar and cycle cosmologies, as well as her latest book, Transcendent Wisdom of the Maya. Enjoy. Gabriela, thank you very much for your time.
Hello, Gordon.
All right. Well, we have a traditional first question for first-time guests around here, Gabriela, and it is, were you a weird kid?
I don't think so. I mean, weird for who? My parents were fairly open people. So, and I grew up in a society in Europe where that was very healthy. So I was creative, that's for sure. And I had my spiritual things that were happening to me, but they did to my sister too, and to my mom too. So that wasn't that strange.
Such as? I mean, did you live in a haunted house, or was it better than that?
No, the house was far from haunted. But, dreams and visions. And, like for example, from my mother gave us a lot of literature about ancient cultures. But I don't think she ever gave me a book about the Maya people. However, I don't know exactly what age, but very early on, I had the idea I would one day decipher the Mayan hieroglyphs, so to say, the Mayan language, which I didn't do, but in a way, diving into Mayan culture and trying to bridge it and to interpret it to our Western culture, today I do feel like I'm deciphering some part of the Maya culture. So
that's a good interpretation of the dream for sure, because what are symbols but things that stand for other things, and you are translating them in. I think that is a fair interpretation of your childhood dream.
And that's the other thing, weird. I mean, obviously, in our rationalist world, we look at weird at a lot of things. I would like to share with you on that subject a little bit of the philosophy of Helmut Plessner, because he is a philosopher who is a very good bridge between what I experienced with the Maya people or other people may have experienced with other traditions and our Western world. He, for instance, who lived in the beginning of the 20th century, he didn't look as human being as one. He talked about eccentric positionality, and he looked at the human being as body and not body, as many other philosophers have. But he realized that having a body also gives us the awareness that there must be something on the other side of the body. He looked at it as a border. And I find this very interesting, and for even people that are not that experienced with out-of-body experiences, easy to understand, because when you have a border and you have an inside, then there must be an outside as well. And to realize that is the first step to being able to explore the outside. And so getting back to your question, we who still live and only recently start to open up again more to out of body experiences that are not only rational in our sense. This, I think, is a very, very good philosopher to also look into. He was very extreme because he actually looked at the human being as homeless. He said, okay, we have a body, but we have so many other multiple in that sense, and we are on the verge of exploring and experiencing. And traditional cultures like that of the Maya can help us with that, because for them this is a given. Not everybody, but a lot of people in their society, and especially shamans or shaman priests, who they don't call them shaman priests, but they're day keepers, have this ability. And it's nothing strange about that. There's nothing weird about that.
Yeah, that is definitely the subtext of the question when I ask, because if you end up on a show like this, yes, I think the rational materialist capitalists are the weird ones, and I feel bad for them. So you mentioned philosophy. I mean, so you grew up in a house where maybe you and your sister and your mother are having these dreams, and so it was fairly open to that kind of experience. But if I understood the beginning part of the book correctly, your tertiary journey began in art and the arts before ending up where you did. I mean, did you discover that Europeans did in fact have some worthwhile philosophy that can be held up next to more traditional ways of being, like Maya cosmologies? Did you find that at university, or how do we get to there?
Of course not. First of all, I grew up in Germany, and so at that time, especially, there was definitely not a time for big spiritual awakenings. So at university, the academia, up to today, and especially anthropology, is fairly closed. I mean, there are a few subdivisions that are a little more open, but unfortunately, many anthropologists, although they have had experiences with native people, and they have themselves had experiences that are beyond what we call rational, they nevertheless would not write about it or would not admit it, because the academia would not accept that. And that happened to me as well. And so having studied art history at first, there were certain limits, and then I switched to anthropology, and there were basically the same kind of limits. So I left for 10 years, and only 10 years later came back and did my master's, but more in city anthropology, and didn't even tell anybody that I had already lived with the Maya, and I already had a life there and experiences, and then went out on my own. And out of the same time, I published, or out of this from the same reason, I published this book, not with academia, but I realized that it's much more important to show it to people who are more open.
Sure. And that's true. I mean, the first time you lived in Guatemala wasn't actually shamanism related, was it? So how did tell us that bit?
It was not, but what it was, it really showed me the life in nature. And when I say nature, I mean a spiritualized nature. I don't mean only among trees, because that is actually something that partly in Guatemala is a little bit more limited, because the society, or in a way, nature can also be very dangerous. So living in nature is not like in our Euro-American sense, a lyrical idea. But living with nature, really diving into the spirituality of it, and that was something that I definitely learned. Living within the cosmos, you could say, or not separated from what nature or what the natural being is.
Yeah, living somewhere where the entire universe is alive.
Correct. Very alive. You might walk over the street and a dog may show up crossing your road, and something triggers, and you immediately make a connection to something, and you realize it is a sign of something that's either about to happen or some deeper meaning. And that happens with trees and with people and just anything.
And this was the time in Guatemala was originally art related. Did you have a sense was it a sense that your kind of destiny was somehow tied up with Guatemala at that point? Or was it, do you simply, and I say simply even though it's profound, that, being able to exist in a living universe and kind of chasing that again? Because it was art related the first time, and I'm just wondering, did you have that feeling of like, my story with Guatemala isn't done yet?
Well, as I mentioned, I knew that from little on, and then I studied anthropology and especially the Maya people. So obviously going there, although I thought the method of anthropology may be more on the side now, despite that I kept the diary. But art was really something that explored the symbolistic world, this symbolic world very deep. And I did paint, and I opened an art gallery also for other artists, and I created jewelry sculptures, and all this, especially also the jewelry sculptures, was so meditative. It was kind of funny because, I was born in Czechoslovakia, although I grew up in Germany. But there are these beads that come originally from Bohemia, from Czechoslovakia. And when I've moved to Guatemala, I took loads and loads of those beads with me. And funny enough, I found out that the Indian people, that the Maya people, use exactly these beads. When they, it's also interesting with the cultural connection, but it's also interesting about our ignorance and or my ignorance in this case. And personally, it was very interesting because it was a connection to my birth culture and something that is very dear to me. Because putting these beads together, unfortunately, we look down on a lot of art making today. It's just something so connecting and meditative, and I'm very sorry that women do not do handiwork anymore, and that it's just not socially fit any longer, and I hope it will be.
Yeah, that was one of the differences you explore in the book that it hadn't occurred to me that way, but it's quite touching that Maya people are tradespeople, but they are within the context of a home by and large. So, homemade is a source of pride and power rather than like, oh, this is made at home, it's not very good.
Absolutely the contrary. Yes, exactly the contrary. Grown home, made home, woven, and not just out of, or how can I say, because everything is connected to the arche. Everything is connected to the origin, meaning that if women weave, the thread is really a symbol for the telluric energies that go into the cosmos and connect the earth and human beings with the cosmos. So when they weave, they really weave with cosmic energy, and that is something they are conscious of, and that is exactly what we have lost. That everything is energy. We see it as objects instead of where it comes from, and instead of the essence that can transform into so many things. It can be a thread for weaving. It can be ingredient for cooking. It can be a seed put into the ground that becomes corn or a tree.
Yeah, it's lovely. It struck me as quite touching because they do have something which presumably we've lost, although it can be recovered. Is that the immediacy of symbols are alive and the immediacy of doing it. But I was also struck by the idea that because it's made in a home and the home is itself a is a place where the living and where the dead attended and where the living live, and it itself is a kind of map of the cosmos. So there's this sort of layers of pride that if you buy a mat or a shawl or something that has been woven, it is, as you say, it is the same thing as the threads running through the universe, but it's also a thing that comes from the whole universe. And I really liked that idea. I liked what a home can and should be seen as in a living universe, I suppose.
Yes, I mean, why do people who can afford it buy clothes from great designers? Because they have a certain force of art, or why does somebody who can afford it buy Leonardo da Vinci? Because there is a certain force, and the thoughts and the ability and all that is in that. So there was a certain connection to the universe that this person had in the moment of creation. And the same goes for the Maya people when they weave this piece, for instance, to make a so-called huipil, which are the blouses, the woven blouses that women wear, takes 3 months. And here comes some tourists and they want to pay $10 for it. That's just impossible because of not being aware of not just the work but the thought and the heart that goes into an elaborate work like this. Yeah. So when we buy that, this is what we're bringing back. And time plays such an incredible role, because if you spend the time looking at it and feeling it and touching it, then you can actually grasp a little bit what's being put in.
Well, Gabriela, this is a good time. It's actually a difficult question. It sounds simple, but broadly speaking, what is the Maya cosmology? We're sort of talking about parts of it, but how would you describe that to the listeners?
Mm-hmm. Phew, that is a broad question. Right? So they do believe in one God. Nevertheless, this one God, creator, already in their book of creation, which is called Popol Vuh, for people who want to dive into the matter really deeply, this is I highly recommend picking up Popol Vuh, the Book of Council, which is basically something like an equivalent idea of the Christian Bible and the Quran, maybe. Then this God energy in that book already is split into two: the creator and the former, meaning the person who forms life. But then, of course, there is also the something that's called Nacht, which is the darkness, that is the matter out of which is being created, and all those things that relate also to the planets. What we just talked about earlier, the home of the Maya people is, and especially the hearth, is a symbol for Orion, concretely about of the 3 stars within Orion. So in a way, they see Orion as the cradle of creation. How exactly that is, I cannot tell you. I just know that the 3 stones that are being held under the fire, or even under the hearth, are the 3 stars in the constellation of Orion. So this constant connection with the cosmos, and at the same time, the weaving of the mythology that is being repeated in rituals throughout the calendar all the time, to make this connection back, to remind people, and not just remind in their minds, but with the whole body, with the whole experiences. So the dances and the rituals really tie the whole experience in. And if you take your time, then you almost can enter this first time of origin of the creation.
Yeah. You mentioned Orion and the hearthstones. when it comes to the saints, one of the things you write in the book is that they double for and mimic celestial occurrences. So the Maya cosmology has a lot of the pre-invasion Catholicism, but it also dances with and uses, but also, that's an unfair way of saying it, because there's some proper Catholic stuff in there as well. So it takes it seriously, but it's not just Catholic. And what do you mean when it comes to the saints, that they mimic celestial occurrences?
Yeah, well, the syncretism, of course, is a very problematic subject, and it definitely has been an invasion into their own culture. However, in many ways, you can say they took it more or less well and combined it with their former God, I would say forms of God. So, for instance, in Chichicastenango, the administrative town of the Quiché people, which is one of the biggest Mayan groups in the highlands of Guatemala, in that town, the patron saint, one of the three saints, is Saint Thomas, and Saint Thomas stands for the sun. So the day that he's been celebrated is December 21st every year, the day of the solstice. And this is basically the biggest holiday, the biggest sacred day of the calendar year. So yes, so it is both. It's not really being expressed that there are cosmic bodies behind these Catholic saints, but on the other hand, as for Christians as well, it was for us and I'm Christian of Christian origin. It was for us the same way one day, and then these faces or these human beings became a representation of what it was before. So it's not that different.
No, I didn't realize. I mean, it was probably in the book. I hadn't clicked, because the town is also sometimes colloquially referred to as San Tomas as well, which means it's the city of the sun. That's really cute.
Well, cute. Okay.
Well, I think it is. I think it's in the sense of...
Okay.
Yeah, not in a dismissive sense, in the sense that that's lovely that it's still called... You can still have places where Maya people live that are called things like City of the Sun and so on. I think that's maybe delightful is a better term. I'm delighted by it.
Well, especially when it's in their language, then most of the things have some kind of meaning like that, which we may not understand because it's an Indian, it's a Maya word, but it means something. And that's the other thing that is very important in the Maya worldview. Things don't mean only one thing. There may be many faces to it, and that is something that the epigraphy struggles with a lot. In the glyphs, the Maya glyphs have various significances because the so-called nawales, those are the day signs. And I hope I'm not jumping ahead, because I'm sure you were going to ask me that.
Oh my goodness, that's totally But anyway, carry on. Yeah.
So the day signs, the 20 day signs of the calendar. There are different calendars that the Maya work with, not just one. And one of it is the Cholkich calendar that works with 20 day signs. So their month basically is 20 days. And those day signs repeat in 13 frequencies. So it starts with, for instance, one Bats. This is one Nawal, one Bats. Goes around through the 20 signs, and then it continues in 2 Bats, goes around the 20 signs, 3 Bats, and in this form it counts up to 260 days that this calendar is the length of this calendar. And yes, so these nawales that are these days that are basically the writing, the glyphs are these days. They have several meanings, And so when, for instance, 3 of those glyphs are put together, the 3 of them in communication have a certain meaning. But since each one of them has many different meanings, one has to be very connected and basically also initiated to understand what has been put in. Because as I said earlier, when we talked about the weaving, the person who wrote those glyphs put something in that moment that basically mostly came from a spiritual message. So usually not the scribe, the writer, the specialist in writing, the scribe, not himself, but the shaman or the highest authority of the people told him what to write. And he wrote what that person received from the numinous beings, which means we could call it the spiritual realm.
The number 13, why is there 13 frequencies? Is that a lunar number?
No, it's almost everything is very, very basically to understand. And it usually goes back, because there is a macrocosmos understanding, so it goes back to the human being. Almost everything goes back to the human being. So the cosmos reflects itself in the human being. So the human being has 13 joints, or 13 points of energy points of entry. If you take it from the ankles to the knees to the hips, the hand wrist, the elbow, the shoulders, and the what's it called, the neck, then you have 13 points.
Fascinating. So the calendar. So if it starts one bets, does it start at the ankles? And so do you sort of build the cosmic human over the course of the 260 days?
Yeah, you could if you wanted to.
Excellent. This is described really well in the book. I actually love this stuff. We have things that we can look at that this makes it appear familiar within kind of European traditions to do with planetary days and hours. But are the days also spirits?
Absolutely.
This is a Maya understanding of time, is that time is actually alive. It's not just this line of events that randomly happen. That time is a collection of beings.
Exactly. And as you just said, I'm pretty convinced that, or I know that our days also have been spirited ones. I mean, just look at Monday, right? In German, for instance, Mond is the Luna, the moon. Oh, in English too, moon, right? Yes. Monday, then Tuesday, and so on. I'm sure some listeners may not be aware of that every day is connected to a planet. But we do not think of that anymore at all. So we have been overruled with just the quantity of counting time. And the Maya people still see time as a quality. So each of the Nahuales, each of those days has its own quality. And therefore, it can be used for writing, for understanding messages, and especially communicating with the ancestors and the numinous beings, because since they have a meaning, as the shamans count those energies around until they count the 260 energies. This is what is the task at one ceremony. You count all those energies and you offer into the fire. And then you basically wait at what point you will receive messages or whatnot. And depending when you receive those messages, connected to that energy that you're just counting, that you can put you can understand a message.
And on certain days, because of time being alive and the Nahuales being beings, certain locations which are governed by certain days become more potent or powerful, doesn't it? So once you actually become initiated and you understand a bit more, or a lot more, obviously, of the language of how this works, there are places in the landscape that are associated with certain days and activate correctly. Is that right?
Well, because with certain energies in the landscape, certain places have different kind of energies, and therefore they are connected to a certain Nahual because it represents this energy.
So there might be, under a particular Nahual, it might be waterfalls, or it might be highways or something.
No. Each waterfall can have a completely different energy.
So is it actual locations in the landscape that are named that are associated with it, or is it because of that energy? So it might be a crossroads, or it might be a high place or something.
Yes, it's because of each place may have a completely different energy, even if it's two waterfalls, and water, of course, is significant. That is important, but at the same time, they may have completely different energies.
No, sure, and I actually really like the sophistication of like Maya landscape energy language. So here's something I know a bit about this historically. But here's a question. Why wasn't, which we'll talk about in a minute, but why wasn't the 2012 ceremony performed at an archaeological site such as Tikal?
Because the Maya people left their cities when the shamans detected that the energy is getting less. The whole world, our whole planet, has a changing energy. I mean, we can even see how civilizations go down, new ones come up, or ones that formerly maybe have been big civilizations, like be China, for instance, today. They, for many years, they have been not that important, and now they're coming up again. So energy travels, and the shamans, the energy specialists, know that. So once they detect that energy goes away, they leave a city. So, of course, it has to do with, for instance, that the earth went dry and there was no rain anymore, and they couldn't do agriculture and they couldn't support living anymore, that they left. Yes, that's true. But that was because this place did lack the energy all of a sudden. So they moved to a different place. They built different cities. That's why the Maya built so many different cities. And and once a place is left, it becomes an archaeological site in our view, but it is not a place where people live anymore. So the people in Chichicastenango, they obviously live there, are very, very alive, and respect their calendar and live all the calendar days and rituals, which is to them meaning reviving the life. What it really is to do a ritual is to revive this ancient energy. If they wouldn't be doing so, they believe, the place would be dead in the first place. So this reviving and giving back to the numinous powers and to God is very essential to keep a place alive. So, yes, so that's, I mean, of course, Chichicastenango was not the only place where 2012 was celebrated, but it was one major place, and definitely for the Quiché, and many, many other leaders of Maya groups came there to celebrate.
Yeah, I love that. My favorite hypothesis, because you're correct that some parts of historic or classic Maya lands had climate change, but some of them didn't. Some of them had permanent water sources and were built on rivers, and they were still abandoned. So something else was going on, and it's part of this language. And I like that Tikal is still potent, but it's a place of ancestors, because people who are dead live there, and the living live in these towns. And so that's where That's where you do your life celebration. So it's not that Tikal isn't important. It's a place where the ancestors live, and the living live here. And I think that's so sophisticated. I think that's a really wonderful way of looking at understanding place and history for a culture.
And not just for the culture. I think to us it really makes it so clear how different one can perceive life and the earth. That's why I think there is so much to learn.
Oh, absolutely. Well, okay, so this is sort of the same question phrased differently. Like, give us an example of, say, a daily calendar fire ceremony. Like, what ingredients might go into it? And also, if I understood, obviously you can't tell everything that happened, but if I understood the process in the book, what does the process of initiation into becoming a daykeeper look like? Because it looks like you tend daily fires. So let's talk about that bit, because I think here's something else that is beautiful and teachable.
Mm-hmm. So first the ceremonies then?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So first of all, the function of the ceremonies is, number one, the communication with the higher-ups, with the numinous beings, which includes the ancestors. And it's also to unify the world, to reconnect the separated, so to say. And as I mentioned earlier, it is to the Maya, it is people's duty to give back to the Creator for having created us and letting us use the earth. So respecting and honoring the Creator in the ceremonies is, so to say, the least we can do. Also, of course, a lot of it is for the shamans. It is to help people and to heal people. So by receiving messages in the ceremonies, they can receive messages about for a patient or client, as we call it. So the service is essential. Now, how does a ceremony work? A very special place where the fire is being held, either in a house or in one of those energy places, which can be in a cave, it can be at a waterfall, it can be in an archaeological site, or other. The fire pit is being built, or usually it's already there because other people have been there before. And so all well-smelling and pleasant ingredients are being used to build the fire. So now in English, oh my God, the wood, a certain pine wood that smells beautiful, and a block of sugar is being put in the center. Then with sugar grains, the glyph is being drawn. The glyph of this Nawal day, of that certain day. And then candles of 4 different colors are being set up for the 4 different directions of the world. And then, the rest is mostly very, can be personal, can be very different. Flowers can go into the fire to build the initial beautiful place, and chocolate a lot of times, and you get the idea.
Yeah, it's lovely.
then one sits around. People sit around, and one is prepared with one's headscarf and all the parts of the clothing. And to protect, for instance, the headscarf, to protect also from certain energies, because of course it doesn't have to, but it can get very extreme. And then we kiss the earth 3 times and thank. And then the whoever leads the ceremony begins the prayer, and which we call on the planets, we call on the four directions, we call on God, of course, we call on the saints, and we call on all the altars that are known, at least in the most important ones in the country. That can be also Tikal. And then the beginning of the counting starts. So, as I explained earlier, the 20 times 13 Nawales, day energies, are being counted. And while that is happening, each initiated participant has different little bowls or baskets with nice ingredients to throw into the fire. So while you say Chumbats, Gebats, Ochibats, and count through those 13 energies, you throw in ideally something that connects to that energy. So, for instance, the energy Kanil means seed. So you would throw in seeds.
And a different one for each of the 13 different frequencies. So when you're... is that right?
No.
Okay.
No, not necessarily different ones. For instance, you have ahonkoli, how do you call that? Oh, sesame seed. Sesame seed. So you have a little basket with sesame seeds. So you would throw in, 13 times, as you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 13 times a little bit of those seeds. And then also candles. And then when you come to the Nawal of the ancestors, which is actually today is 6 Ahmak.
Yeah, cool.
Yes, 6 Ahmak. Then you throw in a different kind of candles that, and after counting the 13, the 13 times, then each participant calls on some of their ancestors to by throwing in those special kind of candles into the fire.
Yeah, there's 20 of these day spirits, and each iteration of it is also, this is that time thing being alive. So each day is, each Nawal is always the same Nawal, if that makes sense. So that's one of the ways you can connect to your ancestors and also see the future and time things like civic events. But in the case of the actual counting ceremony, once you get to one of those 20 days, you kind of go up the frequencies for each of those days. So it's... the calendar goes 1 to 20, and then on each fire ceremony of that particular Noel, you go up the 13 frequencies. That sounds right? That's lovely.
Yes.
I think it's such a cool system.
It is.
Well, you would say that. But, how is... So you're initiated into this system now. Did you have to do a full 260-day walkthrough, or how does it work? Because it appears to be, and I love this idea, that you as a initiate have to build relationships and understanding and communication with all 20 of those spirits. Mm-hmm.
You do during the ceremonies, but you are initiated only with when the higher frequencies happen. So, for instance, during the first 6 days of one sign, you can take days off, and that is where, as you can see in the book, that is where I experienced a lot of the other cultural things, or driving around with the administration to visit the Guatemalan government or other entities of the government or other duties of the Mayan leader that I was doing during those times. And then when the frequencies were high again, then I went back to the ceremonies.
I love it. We do have, it will never be identical because cultures are different. But if I look at what was historically available in, say, classical Alexandria, this method of operating within the kind of pulse of the universe is very inspiring.
Well, because we create our own pulse, we really create our own system. And then when you put the intention into that, and when generations over generations have been putting the intention into it, it becomes real. so it doesn't matter. That's why I always, wonder why people on Earth fight about if there is one God or if there is many gods. I mean, the energy may be one, but it may also. I mean, it's not a human being. We cannot judge from a human being who is captured in its body. Higher energy can transform into many, many different kind of forms. If it's one originally or not, it doesn't really matter. So why do we pound on believing in one God? I really do think that is something that religion has brought in, and I understand it because there must have been a lot of confusion. If you have polydeity, a system of many gods, and everybody thinks and believes something different, don't get me wrong, that can be very, very dangerous.
Oh, absolutely.
And anybody operating with all kinds of energies.
For sure. Speaking of, I mean, we'll bring it back to the fire thing because this is interesting. I mean, you describe fire in the book as essentially the main element for communicating with numinous beings. So is there, and in the book you describe the basics of a kind of Mayan fire divination, right? Is that something everyone does? Is that, or do you need to go to initiated people for that, or to just normal Maya light a candle and watch what it does and use that?
No, I mean, they do light candles and they use fire, and in the herd, fire is very essential, and there should always be a fire that is always lit in the house, or even if not always, but it is central to spiritual life in ordinary families. But other than that, when it comes to ceremonies, then you would go to the specialist who leads the ceremonies, and people participate. The community participates. So they don't necessarily know or how to read the fire.
And this scales, as you mentioned in the book, all the way up to the actual administration of Maya government. So permission ceremonies taking place on the corresponding day to the topic under examination. So is that, talk us through how that works, that kind of thing.
I don't think I understood the question.
Oh, so the stories of... you met the Maya leader, former Maya leader, and became friends with Don Tomas, right? And so there will be questions that were brought to the council that wouldn't be taken to the spirits until the right day came around, even if it's 20 days off at the time. And
absolutely.
So talk us through that kind of stuff.
Well, I can't think of an example at the moment, but any kind of question would be consulted with the ancestors through the fire, and that would ideally happen on a certain day. So, for instance, when it concerns travel, then we may wait for the day of travel, which is the second day of the calendar, the day like our E, and that day would be consulted when it's, some major important overseas travel, for instance, journey.
Yeah, it's excellent. This is kind of related, but not, I suppose, and I really like this idea. So obviously pyramids and world mountains are a very important notion in the world, but in Maya cosmology as well. And when it comes to ceremony and prayer and so on, you kind of describe that when Maya people put intentions into a pyramid or a mountain, they're actually creating a mountain of intention that doesn't have any reference to time, I believe are your exact words. That's a super interesting way of looking at it. I mean, what's going on there?
That what doesn't relate to time?
The mountain of intention that gets put into, like a mountain or a pyramid or something, is put in there, and it doesn't have reference to time, but it can be sort of almost like unlocked by time.
Well, there's time and time. I mean, what we think of when we think of time, we think of chronological time. When the Maya thinks of time, he or she distinguish between chronological time from morning till night, etc., or I call it absolute time, which is out of the timeline. So that time is still existing, but that time is connected to the Nawales. Now, the intention of the mountains, I'm not quite clear about your connection to the time, but you will explain what you can.
Well, it was about absolute time. So there is almost like a subset of experience, which is the timeline that's nested in absolute time.
So whatever is being put into an altar, and mountains are the most original altar. Only after that have been buildings put around it, candles on it, and all those things people do. Buildings, I mean a church or a pyramid. So the mountain is the original idea where the creator has put a certain force, a certain power into it, a certain stronger power. Or it can also be, it doesn't have to be a mountain only, it could be a spring of water, right? But so let's keep with the mountain. The intention one puts into it through prayer, and that has been put into it for generation, sort of stays there. So I'm wondering if I should compare it to the Greek oracle. This one place where people would go and speak their intentions into their wishes. So intentions, I think, in our society are really underestimated. We look at prayer as something religious that belongs to religion, and forget this original importance of it as putting out the intention, what you want, that somehow will resonate. Is that a little bit what you were asking me?
It is, yeah. I'm very interested in the idea of the timeline being a subset of absolute time, so that is the kind of ritual negotiation that goes on there. I think that's a really sophisticated way of understanding prayer and landscape and so on. There's a lot to learn there.
Well, yes, we really need to take ourselves out of this chronological time more. And unfortunately, the new digital technology is not helping, because it's so connected to chronology that we have a harder time to do so. When you go out into nature, you go for a walk, you may forget the chronological time. You may forget what time it is, etc. And that is something we almost need to relearn again. Leave the cell phone at home, leave the clock at home, and train yourself more to be able to hear and perceive outside of that. It's almost a matrix. I'm not against technology at all. In fact, I believe that maybe the fifth humanity is exactly that, will be the technological man. But however, every technology is an instrument, and it's important to know how and how much to use it, and not to forget all the other achievements that humanity has already achieved before technology, not to leave those behind. And going into absolute time without technology is very important to keep learning that and keeping that alive.
No, very much so. Well, that kind of gets close to almost the final question. What is lifting one's heart?
You see, we don't even know.
Yeah.
That's already the answer. We don't even know. Only through practicing. If one doesn't know, then only through practicing prayer and the connection to the numinous beings is when, love. It's true love. And I mean, when you're in love, then your heart lifts, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Or even when you love your dog or your squirrel, or then your heart lifts. And to keep the heart lifted, to lift it up, gives you a higher perception that is less egotistic, and that connects with at least that one other, and then usually also opens up to the network of the emotional network of what our world is made of. So instead of being too concentrated on ourselves and our individuality and our individual life on the ground, by lifting the heart, you connect automatically, and more you do it more and more with the surrounding of the earth, and you can see and hear things that otherwise you might not that easily be able to.
And it seems like very quintessentially Maya way of describing being in that connected and uplifted state.
Yes, I mean, to them, it's not even a question that much. I mean, not that everybody is a good person and all the time, definitely not. But that's why it's so important that in a society, heartfelt things, and that's why I talk about the handiwork and all those things that create heart. When you make something, when you make a table and don't go out and buy it, you actually make it. You foster your heart energy.
Wonderful. Yeah, I love this kind of stuff. I found the book fascinating, Gabriela. I think it was really insightful for people who are obviously outside of Maya cultures, like I presume most of the listeners, but are on their own spiritual journey and are looking to see what can be learned by other people's life ways. So, for people who want to know more, as we get to the end of the show, Gabriela, about yourself and about the books, where do they go? What can they do to find out more? And all of this information will be in the show notes.
The books, I don't know in Australia where it is, but here in the US, it's of course on the usual subjects, as I call it, Amazon and Barnes and Noble. And I don't want to talk for Australia because I don't know your bookstore, so I honestly don't even know where to buy it there. But you can get it online worldwide. And my publisher is Inner Traditions, and then also whatever else you can look up on my website, which is Gabriela Jurosz-Landa. I suppose you have that on your website.
Absolutely.
.com. No, .com. What am I saying? .gimdo. GIMDO.com. And even if for somebody wants to know their Mayan sign, they can go there about the book and, about other things.
Wonderful. Well, it's a great book. As I said, you had a very fascinating journey to your initiation. That's certainly true. And thank you very much for coming and talking to us about the calendar and Maya understandings of time and so on. It's been a riveting discussion.
Thank you, Gordon. Thank you for doing this wonderful radio show, and much blessing to all your listeners.
So I chatted a bit with Gabriela after the show about, daily and hourly planetary prayers in a grimoiric and talismanic context, because as regular listeners probably surmised, that was the part of Gabriela's book I found the most compelling. Oh, and she did want to emphasize as we were chatting that the Mayan system isn't based on planets. And I'm like, that's cool. We didn't discuss that. It was more the structural similarities, right? Particularly the launch sequence, so to speak, for each of the Nawales that includes, calling in the creator, directions, planets, ancestors, and so on. I found that kind of structurally interesting. Gabriela's book, Transcendent Wisdom of the Maya, is very much a personal journey of how she ended up an initiated datekeeper, with some unusual date-based synchronicities to do with the likes of Hurricane Sandy and December 21, 2012, and all the kind of things you would expect from someone, I guess, embarking on a destiny like that, right? But I was principally interested from a comparative perspective in the book, and some of the Maya insights into time spirits will be explored from precisely a comparative angle in the Q2 Premium member activities we've got going on. So if either of those things sound like your jam, the personal journey from outsider to initiate kind of idea, or the opportunities for wider comparison such journeys afford, then definitely check out the show notes for more from Gabriela, including links to where you can find the book. Subscribe to the show while you're there in your favorite podcatcher or on YouTube. Find us at the RuneSoup Facebook page or runesoup.com, and find me on Twitter, where I am Gordon, Gordon_White, WHITE. Until next time.